Hey there, welcome back to Coding at Home with the Code Hub. Hey there, welcome back. We are going to be talking about classes again today, and we're going to be talking about assembling our own camera, as well as a little bit about, maybe we'll move that a little bit up, so we can see our heads. We'll be talking a little bit about classes again. Classes are kind of a big, meaty concept. We talked about it back in Everyone Can Code Puzzles with types. And I have one of our students here to talk to us a little bit about what she found difficult about classes or easy about classes. Anya, what did you think about yesterday's classes section? It got a little more intense, didn't it?
Well, at first I was like, oh my gosh, what? Because I had no idea what you were talking about. It sounded like you were an alien or something. And then I asked my mom to help me.
Okay.
And then she was like, yeah, you kind of like, there's a superclass and a subclass. And the superclass is like the main category. And she tried to explain to me, but then while she was thinking of like a better way to explain it, so
because it's tough to get it to click, right? You know, you're like, well, superclass, subclass, those are just words, right?
Yeah.
So what finally made it stick in your head?
Well, I kind of understood it, so I asked her, oh, because it's kind of like when you go to a museum or a science thingy, and they're like, okay, so today we're going to be learning about mammals, and mammals are the superclass, so they're the main thing. And then, like, let's say dolphins are a subclass.
Okay, a subclass of a mammal. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, oh yeah, okay, dolphins can swim, but they can't walk. And then a dog is like another example of
a mammal.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And they're a bit different than dolphins. I take
they
it.
can swim and walk.
Okay. All right. Yeah, all right. So that's not a bad way. That might be a way that you think about it yourselves. Think about the animal class, mammal class, and then the actual animal that you're dealing with, like a dog or a dolphin. I like that you said you even had the properties on a dog and a dolphin. A dog can swim, so that's true. But it also can walk, so that's also true. So you could use logical operators because a dolphin can't walk.
Yeah.
That I know of. So, all right, cool. And so that helped stick it in your head. You're like, okay, now I understand what classes are for.
Yeah.
And how I would organize them.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's much simpler that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it helps if you're at home stuck with the same thing. Maybe animals aren't your thing as much. It really helps to think about other analogies that you can make. So it might not be animals. Maybe you're really into cars and vehicles. Maybe a vehicle would be a superclass, and then you would have different types of vehicles underneath, like a car or a bus or a bicycle. Those are all vehicles, but they all have different properties, and they have certain things in common because they're a vehicle. They get you from one place to another. All right. Sounds good. All right. Yeah. Thanks. You gonna head downstairs and do some coding?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so now that hopefully we've given you another analogy to think about classes and coding we're going to move over to the iPad and we're going to start working on our camera a little bit today. So let's transition over to our iPad here. All right, so first things first, we are going to go right into the playground. So we're going to launch our Playgrounds app. And you can see I've left off right where we were yesterday, so we're still in our camera class. In case you're just joining us, and if you are, no trouble, because we're just starting out with this playground. Really, we're working through the Assemble Your Camera playground, which you can get from the More Playgrounds section. If we hit See All, here's the one we're working through, and if we tap on that, we can see that. There's a little disclaimer. This is an intermediate playground, so we're actually kind of getting close to the big leagues here. We're starting to get really complicated with the code we write. And that's not complicated in a bad way. This is impressive that you're writing this sophisticated code. Okay, so we're going to open up Assemble Your Camera. And you can see I'm in Your Camera class page. If I tap on that, I'm going to see that the only thing that I missed out on is so far as introduction. We thought about design. We drew our designs in sketches or paper or the notes application. So now we're going to mess around with our camera class. So we talked about introducing a class and what's inside a class. And this should be familiar from when we did our types lesson way back in, I think, day 12, 11 or 12. And this explains a little bit about what's going on in our camera class. I'm going to have a separate video that goes into classes in depth. So we'll cover some of the material we covered when we talked about types. And then we'll talk a little bit about this new inheritance thing that we were going through. Like when Anya mentioned that she thought of it as a class of mammals. And then underneath that, a subclass would be a dolphin or a dog. We'll talk about that. That's called inheritance. And we can see here that this colon is how we code inheritance. So MyCamera is a subclass of space. We have some of our other keywords here like public override init. Because we're a subclass, we can now override methods that are written in our superclass. So we have to make sure to tell Swift, though, that we're overriding it. This is partially for Swift, partially for our own benefit, so that we are conscious of the fact that, oh, this code I'm writing is potentially either not going to run code that was written elsewhere in my higher up class, in this case in my space class. And if I do want it to be run, then I have to use something like this super.init. To call the method that I overrode. All right, so let's move on. So set the properties. This is where we're going to set up our properties for our camera. So as it says here, we are going to tap on the MyCamera file. So that's up here in the tab. So we're going to look in here. It says, all right, so when we create our class, its initializer is called. So that's this part here, this public override init. So that's where we put any code that we want to run when we create an instance of our class. So when someone creates an instance of MyCamera, this initializer is going to be the first code that's run. So this is where we do all of our setup. So it mentions here that the way we want to use this space superclass is we want to write any of the code that styles our component. We want to write it in the initializer. So we could set the background color. Let's drag out the background color. We can set a background image. I'll skip dragging out a background image. You can, of course, you feel free to drag it out or type it out. If I start typing B, I'll see that these are all the properties that I have accessible to me from my space class. So because my space class is the superclass, I have access to all the properties on my space class. So like border color, border width, background color, background image. Here we have a border color, which is orange. So here, actually, let's set up our own border color. I just tapped the autocomplete there. I want to assign a color to my border color, so I'm going to tap the equals sign. Now, I have a UI color class that I can use here, but I prefer using this color picker, so I'm going to tap on the gray square there. And let's see, we're going to make the border color, let's make it pretty bright green. Now, to get that to show up, we need to give it a border width. So I'm going to drag over in the autocomplete bar, find a border width. And I don't want it to be too fat, so let's make it not an and, that's not a number, but make it 4. Now, if I did do that, if I left it as an ampersand, Swift is going to give out to me, and if I tap on the red dot, it's going to say unitary operator cannot be separated from its operand. Ooh, what on earth does that mean? Well, this is supposed to be a number. Now I can hit the fix, but that doesn't help things. So sometimes the compiler will try to guess and offer you suggestions for how to fix your code, especially if you make a typo like that. Doesn't always work out. So I'm going to hit the undo button here and then undo again. And instead of picking the fix from down here, I'm going to actually I know that I need a number in there. So let's give it a number of, let's give it a 3. So that's our border color and width. And then I do like the rounded corners. Let's drag in a corner radius. But let's not make it too pronounced. We'll make it just a 10. And that'll just specify, like this has a corner radius on it. This rectangle here has a rounded edge. That's all that means. Okay, cool. So that's my code here. Let's try running my code and see what we have. Okay, cool. Well, this is my camera so far. I basically just got a rectangle. Now I could change that. I could add an image maybe and make it look a bit more shapely. But I think this works for now. Let's make that border a little bit thicker. This is where you can kind of play around with your properties. If you just change some properties and hit run my code, you'll see the changes pretty much right away, and you'll be able to check out whether or not that design looks good to you. That looks pretty good. We'll keep that so it's stop. Now I'm going to swipe over to the next piece. We've now set up our properties for our space inside the initializer. Now this thing got called when we went to, if we tap on this button here, go back to the main, this got called when we said MyCamera with capital M, capital C, so our camel case, and then you'll notice that that's the same name as that file and the same name as the class we defined. So when I say MyCamera with this parentheses initializer, it calls this init method. All right, so run our code, check for the following. So our camera space appeared, yep, it's where we expected it to be, right in the middle of the screen, and it looks the way we expect it to. Yep, after tinkering around with some of those properties, I think we're pretty happy with it. Cool, so we're looking good. This will give us some hints about changing the size. So if we want to change the size, we might have to go to the main file. So, and this tells you, if I tap on the blue main, it says that this symbol means it's the main file belonging to a page in a playground book. So that's the code that actually gets run when we start up when we hit the button run my code. That's where the code it's gonna run is coming from. So if I look in main, if I tap on here, I could change my size. So maybe I don't want to make it quite as high. Maybe I want to make it more of a rectangle, so I can change the size. I change the height to 300. Oh yeah, that looks a bit more like the design actually that I was looking for. And then if nothing appears, it gives some hints for what you might need to check for. So it mentions that you need a background color or a background image, or you need to specify a border color and width. Because without one of those, and if we were using logical operators, right, that would be if background color isn't set, or the background image isn't set, or the border color and border width aren't set. So if any one of those conditions isn't true, then we're not going to have anything show up. So we need at least one of those things to be true. All right, so next what we're going to do is add the components. Now remember, the components, when we were working in Lights Camera code, those are the things like the shutter button, the front and back button, the viewfinder, and then the zoom slider. So we're going to hit the next button, going to hit next there, or we can hit the next arrow here. And now we're going to add components. So you'll see that it carried over all of my code because this file exists on every single page in my playground book. That's the nice thing about that. If I tap on the main is different. It's back to 400 instead of 300 for my rectangle, if you notice here. So this page will be different for each playground page that we visit. Whereas this MyCamera file will carry over our code changes. All right, so now, like it says, this is the fun part. This is where we start to build our actual camera, so it's going to start to function. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to add a few components. And again, you might want to try to follow your design. So the design, if you recall, I had a design that looked a little bit like this. If I go off to sketches, this is what I had in mind. Actually, so the colors aren't too far off. I have this extra little bump here. But I imagine that my shutter button would be over here. Or sorry, my shutter button would be here. My front and back would be over here. Zoom slider over here. And my viewfinder kind of in the middle-ish. So this is the design that I'm going to try to roughly accomplish in my playground. So I'm going to exit out of sketches, open up Swift Playgrounds again. And so now this is going to show us how to add this stuff to our MyCamera class. So you'll notice that we want to add a few of these under the comment, create the components in our class. Because there's two different spots here where we can see components. We see create the components up here inside of our class. And then there's another comment here inside of our init method called add the components. So we're going to see now what the difference is between those two spots. So we definitely want a viewfinder. So what we'll do is we'll drag out this let camera view equal camera view bit of code. And we're going to put this at the top of our class. Now, if you do what I just did and drop it at the top, do you think that I actually have a camera view property defined on my class now? You might have been able to guess because my code looks green that I don't. So I'm going to tap on this and drag my cursor up there. I'm going to hit return. So now it looks a bit better. Now I've got the pink let keyword. I've got my variable name, my property name there. And then I've got my initializer for a camera view. So this is where typically you can define these anywhere within the class file. Typically we define our properties for our class at the top of the file. So when we looked yesterday at the animal class, if you recall, and you don't have to jump out and look at this, I'm just going to go show you what we did yesterday. We had this classes playground where we were playing around with an animal class, a dog class, and a fish class. So we're going to open up that classes playground in just a second. And I missed because it moved. All right, so we'll open up our classes playground. So you'll notice these are the properties on my animal, and I define them at the top of the class. That's just a convention. I personally like this because then I can go into anybody's code, and if they've written their properties at the top of the class, I know that that's where I'm going to find all the properties for that particular class. And then I know how to use that class. I might know, oh, okay, cool. These are some of the things that I can change on the class or some of the things that I have available to me if I create an instance of that class. All right, so I'm going to back out. I'm going to go back to assemble my camera. Okay. So I added a camera view. Well, I need a shutter button. So I'm going to drag out a shutter button underneath my camera view. I want a front and back button. And you'll notice how they named these properties as well. Every one of these properties has a lowercase letter to start off with. So a lowercase c, a lowercase s, and a lowercase f. They're named really well because I know exactly what they are. I know that this is the shutter button. And we have a new component called a button class that we can use. And it takes no parameters in its initializer. And then we have this one named front back button. So it's very clear what this button does. I really like the way they've named these properties here. That's really nice. And then in my design, I do want a zoom slider. You may not. So I'm going to also drag out this new property called slider. So I've named the property zoom slider, and it's an instance of a slider class. So now I've created all the components, and I've initialized every single one of them. So when I create a MyCamera class, I'm going to have a camera view, a shutter button, a front back button, and a zoom slider. And I can access those with the property. So if I go back to my main, and I say, hey, let me try that dot notation and see what I have accessible on my camera. I have my add methods, of course. Background, color, background, image, border color. All of those are from my space superclass. Corner radius, something called intrinsic size is hidden. Now I don't see the other ones. Why don't I see the other ones? Well, we'll have a look at that in a second. So let's go back to my camera. We'll leave the red dot for now, so we know that we've got a problem building our code. So now that we've created all the components, we're going to use the add method to add each component to the space. Now you might think, well, I just created them up here, and in previous lessons, like in the Lights Camera Code Playground, what we did was we said, hey, I'm going to add it to the space. So I'm going to say space dot add, and then I did some parentheses, and then I'll add my zoom slider, and I have to use a point for that, and that is not a comma. And then remember we had an X colon Y, and I'm now thinking, wait a second, you know what? Normally the autocomplete bar helps me out here. And it's really handy because you can't always remember the syntax for these methods here. Because then I also need a size after this. And I have to create an instance of a size, and I give it a height and a width. Comma height. That's my height parameter, so I'll make it kind of shorter than my width. Okay, and then did I match all of my parentheses? Nope, not yet. I got to finish off my closing one here. Okay, so now I'm adding it to my space. Let's try running my code. Oh, well, it's not going to run because I had that error in the main. So let's go back to, and actually let's delete that. We'll look at that again in a second. Let me go back to my camera. It's giving me an error here. So there's some message saying in declaration of my camera. Let's hit the down arrow to figure out where we are. Okay, down here. All right, cool. So let's go back here. Whoops, we have an error. Expected a func keyword in instance method declaration. Okay, so it thinks that we're declaring a function here. Well, let's try to fix it. Well, we could hit fix, but you know what? This is not going to work out because it's saying we have a dot in our function name. This is not what we want at all. So the reason why this doesn't work is because this is just in the body, our blueprint definition of our MyCamera class. So we can't go doing anything like adding stuff to the space there. We have to do that inside the initializer. And that's down here. That's where this add the components comment comes in. So now we have a viewfinder. So we want to drag this call out here. And you may have trouble like I'm having trouble. There, we want to add our components. I really like this, that we have a comment here saying add the components, and then this is where we'll do all of our adding. Now you'll note that we didn't have to say space.add because, and this is where it gets a little bit weird, but we are a type of space because we're in a camera right now. This MyCamera class is a space. So we can call this add function on ourself. Now, if it helps you, you could also say, if you want to use dot notation, you could say, well, I know that I want to call the add function on myself, so why don't I say self.add? This is the same thing as saying just plain old add camera view at point with a size. So let's go add the shutter button just underneath our camera view. I'm going to leave that one as just add. Now, I wouldn't recommend mixing and matching like that. Try to be consistent if you're going to add the self there. I'm going to add a front back button, and then I'll go down, and because I have a zoom slider, I'm going to add my zoom slider too. Now, if you decide later, if you said, actually, do you know what? I didn't define a zoom slider up here. So I'll simulate that by commenting it out. And then you try to add it down here in the initializer, you're going to get an error. If we tap on that red dot, it'll say unresolved identifier zoom slider. Because it hasn't been defined. That identifier, zoom slider, my property name, hasn't been defined anywhere. So let me uncomment that. Oops. Just by hitting the undo button would be the easiest. I'm going to go back and be consistent here and say self.add for all of my calls to the add function. So now what we have is in our initializer, we set the properties. So we set the background color, we set the border color, border width and radius, or however you've styled your own. And then below, we added the components that we defined up above. So we added our camera view, we added our shutter button, and we gave it a point that we wanted to draw it on, and a size, and a front back button, and the zoom slider. So if I hit run, let's see what we have. No errors, which is good. It's asking me if I can access my camera. I'll say okay. All right. Interesting. Oh, there are buttons I can tap. Let's see. I can even slide the slider. I can't really see it though. So that's not great. Let me go back to main. Let me change my size to a bit bigger so I can see the buttons. Okay. I also can't really tell the difference between my front and my back button. I can see my zoom slider because it looks different. But if I tap on the MyCamera class, the only way I can really tell which is which is if I do the math myself. If I go and look and say, okay, well, camera view, I added at 0.0, Y25. So this is the camera view here. I added the shutter button at point X150, Y minus 150. So X150 would be this side of the middle, and then down 150. All right, so it's probably that one. The front back button was added at minus 150, so this side of the middle, and then down 150. So that's probably that one. And then the zoom slider is the thing in the middle. I added it at 0.0 at minus 150. So I can slide that. I can tap these buttons, but you can see that nothing's happening yet because we haven't quite connected them up. But this is a good spot to stop at today, because what I want you to do is try to lay these components out to match your design. Now, it might not be perfect. What we're doing really is trying to just roughly get it together and get it working. We're going to just get the display roughly looking the way we want it. Put the buttons in the right general place. Maybe even use your image as a background image for your camera. So the way you're going to change where these things are displayed is by tweaking these things, both the size and these points. So that's what I want you to work on now, or this afternoon, or before tomorrow's session. Because tomorrow's session, we're going to go back into this same playground page, and we're going to start to get ready to hook them up and make them a little bit more functional. All right, this is a huge, meaty topic. This is a real application. This is how you would build a real application. So if you're finding it difficult, don't worry, stick with it. We're going to go very slowly over these next few pages. We've got all the time in the world. So we're going to work through building this camera and see how we get on. Now, if you're deciding to go for something like the Swift Student Challenge at WWDC, maybe you want to try building a camera playground for them to play around with. That's definitely something to play with. I'll leave the link for the discussions board where you can talk with us about your Swift Student Challenge. I'd love to see some people taking our class enter into the competition. I think you guys have got enough knowledge now that you could build some really interesting things. And yeah, so lay out your camera, and we'll see you tomorrow. And actually, tomorrow we won't be talking about, I lied, we won't be talking about the camera tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll be having a live look back session. We're going to be going over the Hello Byte Playground. It's for beginners and experienced coders alike. I'd love to see all of you join us. Take a look at our website, thecodehub.ie. I'll have a link off to the specific session we're talking about tomorrow. If you can register, I can send you the info about the link for the video conferencing tool we're going to use. I'm not sure we're going to show it on Twitch. And yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. All right, thanks. Bye.